taken a little bit longer to start recording today. Great. All right, hello everyone. Welcome back to Historical Geology 1404. Today is going to be the first lecture of Module 2. You're getting Lecture 5 today. So this is going to be our first real dive into new content. We're leaving the review section behind. So if any of you, how many of you have taken any kind of biology in the past? Most. Okay. If you have a background in any kind of biology, you'll probably be okay. Having absolutely no biology, some things might be a little confusing. Feel free to ask me questions. And in as much as diving deeper into that subject is relevant to what I need to discuss in the class, I will elaborate for you. Exam 1 was due last night, so that by today we can move on to Module 2 without needing to worry about anything from Module 1. I'm hopefully going to be able to go in and grade all of those today. Let's see, I'm trying to think about other class relevant announcements. Any questions? No? How was everyone's weekend? What'd you do? You were in San Antonio? What was the occasion?
My sibling went to a concert, and then afterwards we went to places.
Just hung out?
Yeah.
Explored? Cool. What concert was it? What genre is that? Oh, okay. Got it. Huh? What?
You started looking at me when
Okay, cool. Anyone else do anything fun? Go anywhere? Anyone watch the rocket launch on Wednesday?
I saw TikToks where they could see it from the plane.
Yeah, there were a couple of those going around. They cleared most of the flight area, but there were a few commercial flights that were passing close enough that you could see it from the upper atmosphere. It's pretty cool. Right now, they are just over 19,000 miles away from the moon. That's the view of the moon that they have right there. That's how close they are. They should get to do their flyby sometime tonight. So tomorrow, we'll start seeing a lot of, actually probably starting today, but, as they approach, we'll see some really cool images of the moon, including parts of the moon that no one has seen, which is going to be really, really cool. We've sent, I want to say, several nations at this point have sent satellites around the far side of the moon, but I don't know that any manned mission has ever gone around the dark side of the moon, with at least not with the level of filming and scientific instrumentation that we have right now. So we're going to get some very, very cool shots of the moon. And bearing in mind that a substantial chunk of the reason for this mission is to get survey photos of as much of the South Pole as we can, because that's where our moon base is supposed to be built in 7 years. So the more we know about the landscape there, the better we'll be able to pick a spot. We'll have more information for what's to come from that. So yeah, really exciting. My whole family has been really invested in this the whole week. I watched the rocket launch with my kids on my couch Wednesday night, and they were just glued to the TV. And the live stream, which if you go to the, let's go here. No, I don't want to look across my channel. Here we go. This is it. If you go to the live stream, this should be it. Yeah, Artemis 2 live mission coverage. This is coming to you straight from their ship. That's the moon. Okay, the closer they get, the more resolved it'll get. The further away they get from us, the more the signal breaks up a little bit, which is why the moon kind of just looks like a white blob. But they're taking high-definition images that will be compressed and sent back to us via radio wave. And then we can uncompress those, and we'll get the beautiful images that we're excited to see. But yeah, you can see, and they will actually, here in about 3 to 4 hours when the crew finishes waking up, and they'll turn on their camera on the inside, and you'll be able to see them as they do their daily tasks. It's been really neat to watch them do all that, and my son has been absolutely crazy about it. I was just telling Emma this. He actually, so this is my 7-year-old, by the way. He came out of his room last night. This is about 2 hours after I put him to bed. He came out of his room last night because it was Easter, right? Everyone had a good Easter, right? Happy Easter, everyone, by the way. Sorry, I completely forgot to say that. But I was so busy yesterday that we didn't really get to watch much of the live stream. So he comes out of his bed last night and he says, "Daddy, I can't sleep. I need to know the astronauts are okay." So I turned on the live stream and we watched it for 10 minutes or so he could know that they were doing all right. And then he went back to bed. That's how invested my 7-year-old is, and it makes me so happy. It brings me so much joy to know that my son is having the childhood experience that my grandparents got to have watching the first missions to the moon. Makes me so happy. All right. All righty. On that note, 5:44 p.m. is, they just said, this is muted, but it's showing the text, at 5:44 p.m. tonight, that's probably Eastern time, so that would be 4:44 for us. At about 4:44 p.m. is when they will start their transit of the moon, which means that they'll be close enough to start wrapping around it. And then, I don't know, it'll probably take them at least a few hours to go all the way around, get their pictures, and then start back. Okay. On that note, any questions before we start with today's content? No? Okay. So, Module 1, we reviewed fundamentals of geological principles. Okay? Now we're going to tie all of that into a whole new aspect of earth science. Geology doesn't just concern itself with rocks. It also concerns itself with what's in the rocks. And what's in the rocks? The evidence of life. Evidence of life, the history of life on our planet. That is within the realm of geology. Specifically, mostly, in the branch of geology called paleontology, where I spent a significant chunk of my early career, okay? And I still dabble in it today, but for the most part, I've turned my attention spaceward for the most part right now. But I do have quite a bit of experience and publications in paleontology, so I'm still quite passionate about it, okay? Life. We're going to talk about misconceptions about life in this class. We're going to talk about where life could have come from. Notice I said the word could, okay, because we're talking about a history that is so long, it's still essentially wrapped in a substantial amount of mystery, okay? So all we have at this point are hypotheses and theories, okay? But we're going to start off with just when I say the history of life on Earth, I want you to imagine life starts, however that is, and it's continued on from that point, but it's changed. Life has changed pretty substantially. When you look at something like this, have you ever seen something like this, guys? No? If you were to take this and flip it up 90 degrees, it would look like a tree. Do you know what we call this? A lot of people call this a tree of life. Okay? The tree of life, which starts from one root and branches out from there. The earliest fossils that we see, bacteria. Great. Then the next ones we see in the fossil record, a little bit younger than that, archaea. Then we branch off into eukarya and all of these other things, chromatozoa and all of that, okay? So there's a lot of life that we can see in the fossil record. And trying to piece that all together into the order and relationship that life formed in, came about in, we call that something called phylogenetics, okay? So this is a phylogenetic tree, okay? Most commonly referred to as a tree of life, but phylogenetic tree is actually the terminology for it. Now, there is a problem with this tree that anyone who has, how do I put this? A sense of the implicit bias that humanity has to themselves will notice. Where are mammals on this tree? AKA us. Where are we on this tree? Yeah, if I were to flip this up into an actual tree shape, where are we? Right at the top of it. Isn't that just like a human to put ourselves at the top? Of course, we're the ones making the tree, so we kind of have the right to do that, I suppose. But if we're trying to look at it from an unbiased point of view, it really depends on the parameters that we're making the tree with. But most phylogenetic trees like this, you'll see mammals, aka us, at the very top of it. The pinnacle, the height, the peak of evolution, right? It's where we like to put ourselves. I don't really like that, but again, I guess we have the right to do it because we're making the tree up. Okay, we're making it out of the list of all the things that we have on the fossil record, so I guess we can put ourselves wherever we want. All right, now let's talk about where life came from. Okay, there are two main theories about where life came from, about where life began, how it began. The first one doesn't really have any one particular name. I'll refer to it as the terrigenous, okay? Terra being the Latin name for Earth, okay, our planet. If we were to go and explore the galaxy and meet aliens and stuff, what would we call our planet? What would we call it? Would you just call it Earth, maybe? Would you call it Terra? That depends on the language you're using, right? Depends on the language you're using. In English, we call it Earth, but it's not only that. The generally well accepted Latin name for Earth is Terra. So when you hear something like terrestrial, that refers to things on Earth, right? Terrigenous, beginning or originating from Earth, okay? So what this states is that early on in Earth's history, and I'm talking like a billion years after it was formed, because remember, our nebular formation theory, right, where we get our solar system forming out of all of the debris that was trapped here in this area, and you get this star that forms in the middle of all that debris, and outside of it you get a whole bunch of other things trapped in various orbits. So the planets coalesce, and they stay crazy, crazy hot for a long, long time, okay? There are asteroids and comets and meteorites constantly bombarding the surface of our planet, adding mass to it. And then we get this other planet, remember Theia, that slams into early Earth, busts a piece off the side, which turns into our moon, right? So we get all of this heat-generating activity. So the surface of the Earth stays pretty hot and probably molten for a very long time. Not really conducive to the formation of life as we understand it. But then you let that start to cool off. And as it starts to cool off, you get this very thin crust that starts to form on the outside of our planet. As this crust starts to form, but magma still tries to come up, that's when we start seeing things like volcanoes. Okay? Now, what do we know about volcanoes? Volcanoes produce what? Huh? Magma comes out, sure, but what else? Huh? Okay, sure, but sure, this is adding to the accretion of our crust. But what else comes out of a volcano? Lava, debris. What's the first thing? Do you remember I compared? Yeah, exactly. You remember I compared it in 1403 to you're popping the cork off of a soda or a adult beverage, right? Okay, right? And what's the first thing that comes out? Gas. Most of volcanic gases are what? Do you remember what the general composition of volcanic gases are? The CO2. Hydrogen in the form of what? There's not just straight up gaseous hydrogen. That's highly explosive. It has to be bonded with something to be stable. What is hydrogen bonded to? Oxygens in the form of water. Yes, we get nitrogen, carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, but the vast majority of the gases that come out of a volcano are water vapor. Okay? Where did that water come from, though? Well, some of it was formed naturally through chemical processes that happened here, but you know where most of the water here on Earth came from originally? Comets and asteroids. Accreting onto the surface of our early planet. Water is I believe, one of, if not the most common three-molecule or three-atom molecule that we can see out in space. It reflects back at us from everywhere. Okay? There is so much water in space. It's just in a frozen state, attached to asteroids and meteorites and comets and just hanging out in clouds. Okay? So all of this debris brings water to Earth, and it builds up over 1 billion years. And then finally, we start to form this little crust, and out of this crust pop up volcanoes. Those volcanoes are spitting water vapor out, in addition to the other gases. It starts to form a very basic early atmosphere. As the atmosphere gets thicker over time, that water vapor starts to cool off, condense, and then what happens? What do we know from our water cycle? What happens when you condense water in the atmosphere? It rains down. And as it rains down onto the surface, it starts to collect. Where does it collect? In the lower lying areas, what will one day be ocean basins. And this is where the early oceans form. Okay? Very thin, very shallow, very hot. We have a term for this. A lot of people will use this term when referring to these early oceans. Have you ever heard primordial soup? No? Primordial soup, what does that mean? When I say soup, you think, oh, okay, a nutritious beverage or meal, right? It's full of all the stuff. This water at this point in time is not like the water we have now. Sure, it's got H2O. That's what makes it water. But it's filled with all sorts of other dissolved gases and elements. It is starting the process of weathering this material at the surface, breaking it down at the chemical level. So this water is filled with chemicals. Like, you would not want to drink this water. Okay? Nasty, nasty stuff to us. But you know what it did? All of these chemicals in this primordial soup, they started bonding with each other as temperatures cooled or increased, or as new ingredients were added, new bonds formed. Following the laws of physics and chemistry, they would bond together, and eventually you start getting chains of bonds. Those chains of bonds make something that we call amino acids. Have you heard that term? Amino acids. Very, very, very important. Amino acids are chemical chains that don't have, let's say, behavior, but seem to have, according to chemical prompts, they are more drawn towards certain things than others. Okay? And so amino acids, some of them would come and click together. Some of them would be automatically drawn to another thing and incorporate it into itself. And so as these chains of amino acids grow and grow, and by the way, this is all stuff we've replicated in a lab. This is not theoretical. We know this is how this sort of thing happens, okay? These amino acids come together. They make longer and longer chains. And these chains become more and more complex. And eventually, you get the first, what we call proteins. A protein. When I say protein, you think like, I'm a gym bro and I drink my protein shake every morning, right? Well, sure. Protein is a fundamental part of biology. You need proteins to build certain cells. Actually, most cells, okay? At least that I'm aware of. Again, I'm not a biologist and geologist with some biology training, right? And background. So you need proteins for a lot of things, including muscle growth, cell growth of a lot of different kinds. So these proteins are now coming together. We have amino acids, we have proteins. We get sugars that bond them together. All of these things start to form, and we start seeing the first helical formations of these chemicals. Okay? We believe the first actual coding mechanism, like not living thing, but precursor to living things, was RNA. And if it wasn't RNA, RNA developed alongside the other thing. And what is that other thing? What is a DNA? DNA is made out of amino acids, sugars, and proteins. We can make DNA out of all of those inorganic ingredients that were present in the primordial soup. Same with RNA, by the way. The only difference between RNA and DNA is there isn't this sugar chain, okay, holding the double helix together. There's just one helix, Okay, not a double in an RNA strand, which means that it does not have the ability to hold information like DNA does. Your DNA holds trillions upon trillions of lines of code that make you, you, which have been added to over the course of evolution. RNA doesn't have that. RNA only has one thing, purpose. In your body, you use RNA to send messages. Your brain will send RNA to make a message to go and do this thing, grow this cell, grow this organ, okay? You're filled with RNA that your own body produces. Hostile RNA exists as well. We call those viruses, like the flu. That's when your body is invaded by enemy or foreign RNA, okay? And your body is trying to fight it. RNA and DNA have been around for at least as long as each other, but it's possible RNA actually may have come first. Which makes an interesting question, is there a world out there where the same process happened, but DNA never came around? So it's an RNA world. Very interesting to think about that. What would that even look like? Don't know. Maybe someday we'll find out. Okay, so nevertheless, without getting too far off topic here, we had DNA. So many combinations of amino acids and proteins and sugars came and went and came and went and came and went before one stuck. One that was versatile enough to survive that environment and keep evolving. Keep changing, adapting to that environment. So what's happening to our environment? Things still get a little bit cooler as time goes on. Oceans get deeper. Generally speaking, the world starts to cool off, at least at the surface. Okay? Now the stage is set for what happens later. We have two different types of metabolisms that come out of this process of making DNA, and living things need two things. Okay? They need sustenance and energy, and often those two are tied with each other. Okay? We often derive our energy from the things that we consume. Okay? You and me, we consume salads and burgers and all sorts of yummy things for our sustenance. We get energy. You know, when you look at your label, I mean, this is a bottle of water. It doesn't have a nutritional label, but some of you, no one has food out. Okay, well, at least nothing with a label. But when you look at a food label, it will say nutritional value on there. It tells you how many what are in there. What's the first thing? The biggest number it shows? Calories. What is a calorie? Anyone know what a calorie is?
Like energy?
It is. It's exactly energy. Sorry, excuse me. A calorie is the amount of energy required to raise a certain amount of water by a certain amount of temperature. Okay? I want to say it's 1 cubic gram of water, 1 degree, something like that. I don't remember exactly. But it is a measurement of energy. It is telling you what is the energy potential in the food that you are eating. Now, if you eat more calories than your body needs, what does it do with that excess energy? Stores it as fat, which is energy you can use later. Okay? And this is where physics and biology come together physically in your body. Your body requires energy to function. So does every other living thing. Now, there are two ways that we can metabolize consumed things for energy. What you and I do, okay, that's more or less a form of chemosynthesis, okay, which is we ingest things, we break that stuff apart, and then we make energy out of the stuff that's broken apart. The other one is photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is when you ingest things, you bring things in like a plant does with water and the gases in the atmosphere, but it cannot do anything with them without an external form of energy to help with that. Okay? So they use sunlight, they absorb sunlight through the leaves, and in the leaves, there's a cycle. The name of the cycle is escaping me right now. But it breaks apart things like carbon dioxide so that they can absorb the carbon and build their tissues out of it, and then they exhale or respire the oxygen and water vapor as a result of that interaction. but they need the sunlight to make it happen. That is photosynthesis, okay? So in the fossil record, we know that there were chemosynthetic organisms first. We have fossils of them from deep, deep, deep in the ocean. No sunlight required. I mentioned this to you before when we talked about those black smokers at the bottom of the ocean. There are still thriving populations of chemosynthetic bacteria and other organisms that live deep, deep miles under the ocean where sunlight has never reached. Okay? That still is true on our world. Okay? So this is the first concept of where life could have begun. Here, following this process. But here's the thing. It absolutely could have happened here. But there's the other side. If it could have happened here, it could have happened anywhere else with the same sort of conditions. Is there another world anywhere nearby us that we know once had the same conditions that Earth did? Mars. Exactly. Until 2 billion years ago, barring plant life potentially, Mars probably looked a lot like Earth. It had oceans, it had rivers, it had weathering, it had clouds, it had ice caps, all of that. So why not start life somewhere else and then it comes here? I'm not talking about spaceships. I'm talking about, I guess you could call them naturally occurring spaceships. This is a concept called panspermia, that life began somewhere else and then came here. Seems far-fetched until you realize that there are chunks from Mars here on Earth. Yeah, we have found pieces of Martian rock here on Earth. What could cause this? Well, you hit Mars with a hard enough object like an asteroid, and it blasts chunks of Mars off into space. Those chunks of Mars fly through our solar system until they are caught in the gravity of Earth, and then they land here. We have found pieces of Mars here. By the same token, there are absolutely chunks of Earth on Mars from the same concept, that same process. What if the same process of amino acids and protein chains and everything started on Mars and then hitchhiked a ride on a chunk of rock here? There's really no way to say that couldn't happen. And considering how the extremophile bacteria that live at the bottom of the ocean here on Earth survive, they very, very easily could have survived the cold of space in an asteroid to get here. Then there's the other argument. What if life started here and then hitchhiked a ride to Mars and, there's some evidence of life there? The only way to know for sure if one of these things is true, if panspermia is actually true, is to find fossils on Mars that are exactly DNA-based, just like life here is. If life on Mars is DNA-based, it basically proves panspermia correct. It began in one of these places and then went to the other. Because this is the way, and this is something we'll talk about when we discuss evolution here today. The statistical likelihood for the same evolutionary trait to develop, one after the other or in two separate places, is extremely small. I'm talking almost non-existent small. When we're talking about the quantity of it would be like saying someone in North America was born and someone in Australia was born with absolutely no genetic connection other than whatever their past ancestor thousands of years ago was, and they are the exact same person with the exact same traits down to the exact same DNA sequence. The likelihood of that happening is like 10 to the quadrillionth. Okay? Never going to happen. The likelihood of life evolving on the same world in the exact same way as another world is about the same, if not even less. Okay? So if we go to Mars and we do find fossils and they are exactly like Earth fossils, panspermia, true. Okay. At least both may be true. Panspermia right now is hypothetical, but life could have begun here and gone there, or it could have begun there and gone here. Either way. Okay. How do we know life could begin on another world and then travel to another place? How do we know that Earth is not the only place where life could have developed? We played around with this, actually. Some scientists in the 50s conducted what is called the Miller-Urey experiment. How do you go from having organic, aka things that are based around carbon, oxygen, hydrogen in a specific order, molecular sequence to promote life as we have it now? How do you go from having organic things out of inorganic ingredients? You have to start with inorganic because organic doesn't just show up. So they took all of the inorganic ingredients that we know are out there in space. We can see all this stuff. Methane, nitrogen, water, right? They took all the stuff that we can see smiling back at us in space using our telescopes and other instruments. We know all this stuff is out there aplenty. They combined them in an enclosed glass environment and then added one thing. They only had to add one thing: electricity. They just needed to add a little electric jolt. And you know what came out of that? All of these random, inorganic ingredients thrown together in this glass environment, and then you add an electrical impulse, and within a few hours, they were making amino acids. They were combining together, and they had a glass jar filled with amino acids. Actually, if I remember correctly, the pressure inside, like from the quantity of amino acids and then like other chains that were coming together, right? It made so much pressure inside their glass vial, I believe it broke. And they said it smelled so bad. It smelled like what'd they say? It smelled like a manure pile or something like that. They were making organic debris, basically, organic substance from only inorganic materials. So could it happen on Earth? Yes. Could it happen anywhere else that those things combine? Absolutely. Would it always turn into this? That's where things start breaking down. Will you get amino acids? Yes, all the time. We even took a sample off a passing asteroid. It was passing through near Earth, and we sent a probe out to that asteroid, and we took samples off that surface, and you know what we found? Amino acids. Like 3 of the amino acids that we have in our own DNA chains were on that asteroid. It happens. It happens everywhere. So, potential for life in other places? Huge. Absolutely massive potential for life in other places. Would it look like us with the exact same DNA change? That's where things start breaking down statistically. Okay. All right, now that I beat that dead horse a bit, what does it mean to be alive? Throw out some words. What does life require? Breathing. Okay. Does everything need to breathe that's alive? Reproduction, sure. Does everything reproduce the same way, though? No, it doesn't. We are humans. We reproduce sexually, right? There are organisms that don't do that. You know that trees reproduce sexually too? Yeah. They have flowers that put out essentially sperm into the atmosphere, okay? Pollen. A lot of us sneeze whenever we breathe it in. We're allergic to it. And then there are other flowers on those trees that absorb the pollen into what is essentially an egg. And then it grows something that we call a fruit. And inside of that fruit, seeds. Baby trees, right? Okay. More or less the same sort of function that we do. But there are organisms that don't do that. My master's thesis was focused on a group of microcrustaceans. I'm talking about They're in the same family as lobsters and crabs and all of that. But they're about the size of, let's see, what's a good comparison here? You know like the decorations that you put when you're making cookies? Like the little balls of candy? Huh? Yeah, the sprinkles. They're about the size of those little sprinkles, okay? They're called ostracods. They, most of the time, reproduce through parthenogenesis, which means that they don't have two sexes. They simply copy themselves. They produce eggs inside of their bodies, lay those eggs, and those eggs hatch into new ostracods. Okay? Not quite the same thing as cloning, but I suppose similar in concept, you could think. Now, the cool thing with ostracods is they, in times of environmental stress, or if their population is suffering because there's too many of one genetic variation, they will actually, a certain amount of their population will change sexes. And then the population will start to reproduce sexually. And this changes the genetics of their population to be healthy and adaptable. We'll get more into that concept later, but my point is, not everything reproduces the same way. And this is kind of another evidence for evolutionary principles, because everything has learned how to survive in the specific environment that it came in, okay, or that it's developed in. Okay, so what does it take to be alive? I've heard respiration, sure. I've heard reproduction, sure. Something else here, it's very important, self-regulation, okay? You spread nutrition and energy through your body, right? So does a plant, so does a bird, so does an earthworm, so do bacteria. Life as we have it here on Earth is in the form of a cell. Do you guys know what a cell is? So many hands went up when I asked if you had taken biology. Someone tell me what a cell is.
Mitochondria is the power.
My gosh. Mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. This is true. But what is a cell? It's essentially a self-contained module within which are a few components. Yes, mitochondria to process energy to sustain that cell, but also your DNA is in those cells. Okay? That's how those cells know how to reproduce themselves. Cells. They take nutrition in and out. Okay, we can call that a form of respiration if you want to make that a characteristic here. They can replicate themselves using the DNA. They have their own blueprints. Okay? They have their own blueprints and they can make copies of themselves. And they regulate their own energy and nutrition using things like mitochondria. Each cell in your body is alive. You are made out of trillions and trillions and trillions of living things. Now, how did that happen? We'll get there. But think for a second about how incredible that is in concept. That this early stage of life on Earth we were talking about, we've gone from amino acids to proteins. Cells are a little further down the line, but we've gone from there all the way to you and you and you and you that are made out of so many of those cells that all work together to make one function, and that function is keeping you alive. Now, here's a question. Are viruses alive? You're pretty adamant, Jared. Tell me why.
Because they're like, I don't know why, but I just heard it somewhere because they're designed to spread it around.
They're designed to just spread themselves? What does that sound like? Is it reproduction? Yeah, kinda. Is it like something that I described earlier? Was there something I described earlier that only has one function? It only has one command, one imperative. Huh? RNA. Yeah, viruses are essentially RNA codes. In your body, they're used for messages. Take this information to point A to point B. Can't hold anything. Cannot be a blueprint. Viruses are the same. Their one imperative, make more of me. So what they do is you get a viral infection. That virus goes into your body, starts digging into your cells, tears apart those cells on the inside to make extra copies of itself. This is why it takes you so long to get over a virus like the flu. Your body can't kill what's not dead or what's not alive. Normally what would happen is your white blood cells would swarm over, say, like a bacterial infection and absolutely annihilate that sucker. They would use various forms of acids and other defenses that they can produce to destroy whatever that bacterial infection is. Okay? That's why you get pus. That pus, that's white blood cells that are attacking that particular infection. That's why you get scabs. Okay? The scabs over something like a cut. That's your body coagulating blood and tissue there to stop that infection. Okay? Can't do that for a virus. So what does your body do? You ever notice that right before you start realizing you're sick, your body gets like really tired? Or like maybe your blood sugar starts spiking, right? Like you get really hot and sweaty and you're like, oh man, why am I uncomfortable? And then the next day, right, you're sick. Why does your body have that immediate kind of out of the blue reaction? And then the next day you start feeling actually sick? It's because your body is expending energy to overdrive, make white blood cells to respond to a viral infection that you are fighting and you don't know it yet. The symptoms of that viral infection start hitting you a short time later as your body starts to feel weaker and more depleted from the amount of energy that's going into making white blood cells. But why do you need to make so many white blood cells? They cannot kill the virus. The only thing your body can do against the virus is swarm it, suffocate it, and spit it out of your body. So when you are recovering from your virus, you are expelling viral contaminants from yourself that are covered in dead white blood cells. You're sending them out in your poop, in your urine. When you cough, they're coming out of your skin pores, okay? That's why every doctor will tell you, you will still be able to pass this illness onto someone else 2 to 3 days after you feel better, because your body is still getting rid of all that stuff. And if you go and you shake someone's hand or you kiss somebody, right, where you do any interaction with someone, you cough in someone's face, even if it's 2 or 3 days after you don't feel sick anymore, your body is still getting rid of those viral cells. Not cells, but the white blood cells that are the virus is contained inside of them. Okay, so you can still get someone sick from that. Okay. So according to our definition of life, self-replication, self-regulation, respiration, if we want, okay? No, viruses are not alive. They do not spread like this. Oh. My video is stuck. Hold on. Let's see if it unstucks itself. Oh, it's having such a hard time. Maybe if I close the here, yeah. Let me make sure that my recording didn't stop like it did the other day. No, we're good. Good. All right. Okay, viruses are not alive. They do replicate, but they replicate by essentially cloning themselves, ripping apart cells, and using the ingredients of the cells to make more copies of themselves. Not the same thing as reproduction. Okay? And they don't make their own energy. They use the energy of the cells they're invading to do all of that. Let's go to the next slide and then full screen it so it doesn't give me a hard time with that video. Okay? All right, so now that we're a little more clear on what life is and the ways that life can form and the ways that life may have begun here on Earth, let's talk about how that ties into geology. Okay? Fossilization. This is how we have evidence of life here on Earth. This is how we know it goes back billions of years, because there is life in rock that has existed here on Earth for billions of years. Do the math. For the life to have been in there, it must have been around then. Okay? So, we have living things, starting with bacteria, moving on to other things that we'll talk about later. But regardless, each of these living things is made out of these organic, later on, cellular components. When that thing dies, it gets buried in sediment. This doesn't happen all the time, which is why we don't have a world full of fossils. We have fossils that we find every now and then, okay, in the right conditions. But when it gets buried in that sediment, and it's not allowed to decompose, or at least not as quickly because of all that sediment, then each one of those cells gradually gets replaced with a crystal of some kind of mineral. This happens in sedimentary environments, guys. Okay, so any dissolved mineral that's in the water moving through that system, or even just tiny little grains of sand can fill in the spaces left behind by the presence of that organic remains. Okay, this is fossilization. So you can have a couple of ways that this happens. Okay, permineralization is when your minerals grow into the shape where that was once occupied by that cell. Okay, by that living thing. That's when you get the really nice looking exact duplicates of the living thing, okay? And then there's another version called carbonization, where the entire thing is replaced by carbon. This typically only happens with things like trees, where there's a lot of carbon present in the organic thing itself, okay? And that carbon can remain behind to fill in that space. But it's usually some form of mineral replacement, okay? Here's another very important concept. We typically, I say typically, I'll get to that part here in a second, when it's atypical, but we typically only find hard parts of the things, the living things. Why would it be uncommon to find soft parts? Why would we be unlikely to find soft tissue fossils? Huh? Harder to preserve, why? It's not that they have more cells. They may, but that's not why.
They don't do that good against the weather. Like, that makes sense?
Yes, weathering and decay and anything else. Soft tissues. You guys ever passed roadkill? Really fresh roadkill. Pretty much everything's still there. What about roadkill that's like a week old? Bones, some nasty tissues left behind. Why? What's happened to that roadkill in the week? Huh? It's been decomposing, and it's been eaten. And there's any number of things that can happen to a thing after it dies. But most of the time, what's left behind? Hard parts. Bones, teeth, claws. Not many things in the world eat those. Okay? And even the things that don't eat those, they don't get broken down as easily. Okay? So this is a big part of the reason why we do not find soft tissue fossils very often. Now, we do occasionally get that. And it's very special when we do. Okay? When we get the level of preservation that is so good that the soft tissues are kept, we call that a Lagerstätten. Okay? It's a German word. Okay? So, this is a worm. Are there any hard parts to a worm? No. It's all soft-bodied. Okay? But we have this fossilized worm. Why? This is a Lagerstätten. A very, very rare occurrence where soft bodies were kept so perfectly away from decomposing environments that they don't degrade, they don't break down. Look how long you're getting, dude. It's like 3.5 feet right here.
Can you put them right here?
Yeah, bring them over.
I don't know if this is true because it was on TikTok.
Okay.
But I had heard a story where,
Just don't let him go under the table.
like,
Okay.
some girl's snake, her snake, she wasn't eating for a while, and she was like sleeping in her bed or something, and she went to the vet, and she told her that she hasn't been eating, and that she's been sleeping with her, and the vet said that she was trying to eat her, like she was trying to make herself be able to eat like the owner.
That might depend on how big the snake was. Do you know how big the snake was? People have been eaten by large enough snakes. Yeah, there was a story. This was in, where was this? Indonesia somewhere, I want to say. But this lady was like, it was Indonesia or Thailand, I think. But this lady was like gardening. She was like a 70-year-old lady. She was just out in her garden. This gigantic snake comes out and eats her, like wraps her up, suffocates her, and eats her. I mean, we'll come across 20-something foot anacondas still. There are big snakes out there. The Everglades out in Florida, big snakes come out of there all the time. Thailand, Indonesia, some places in, I don't think there's actually any of the bigger ones in China. None of the potential people eaters. But like Southeast Asia has a lot of big snakes, and so does Florida.
Did they ever try to eat themselves?
Eat themselves?
Yeah.
Like each other.
Oh, each other?
No, like themselves. I meant like themselves. Like,
Do you try to eat yourself?
no, but
Well, neither would a snake.
I mean, they be trying to eat anything, so.
Yeah, not themselves. Not themselves. Okay, now, what about, say, plants? Do plants have bones or horns or claws or teeth? No, so then how do we have fossilized plants? Well, there's this type of tissue called cellulose. Not to be confused with cellulite, okay? It's not the unappealing fat tissues that we get built up in our bodies if we're not careful with our diet, right? That's cellulite. Cellulose is a type of tissue that we see in plants that essentially makes kind of a more or less a rigid honeycomb sort of structure in that plant. It is the development of cellulose in plants that allowed them to go from just kind of being seaweed in the water to having these rigid structures that can stand up against gravity here on land. Okay? We'll talk more about the evolution of plants later on. But cellulose is something that can be preserved through fossilization. And because it makes that sort of honeycomb structure in the tissue, you're going to get the development of crystal growth in that honeycomb structure. So you're preserving the cellulose and you're filling in all that empty space with crystals in the shape of that plant. Okay? That's how we get plant tissues. Some other ways we can get fossils. We can get molds. A mold is what happens. Oh. Even still, I should have been bringing him out more to help you get used to him. You can hold him, you can touch him, you can do whatever. You don't want to hold him. That's fine. That's fine. A mold is what happens when your original fossil is gone, but what's left behind is the empty space. Okay? So you typically what you'll get is a mold and an impression. So you have an empty space, and then it gets filled in with something that takes on the exact same shape of that fossil. Okay? So a mold and impression, a positive and a negative, okay, is what you'll usually get out of that. And then there's trace fossils. We've talked a little bit about trace fossils before. Evidence of the thing being alive without having been a part of it. It's not a bone, it's not a tooth, it's things like a footprint, okay? Or a burrow that it dug or anything like that.
How are modes preserved? Like, how are modes made and the objects not there? Does that question make sense?
Yes, it does. So here's an example. Do you remember when we learned about Pompeii? When Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD? Okay. So that volcano erupted. The pyroclastic cloud swept through the towns of Pompeii and Herculaneum, instantly killed everybody and buried them in super hot ash. Years and years, thousands of years later, when people were digging through that town, through that rock, what did they find?
I'm guessing they found the modes.
No, there was nothing left of the people. There were, however, empty spaces in that rock in the shape of the people that they were in when they got burned alive. Every component of their bodies was gone, but what was left behind was the space that they had occupied while that ash was forming around their bodies. Okay? So we have a negative. So what did they do about it? They filled those things in with plaster and then broke the rock off from around them, and now we have molds, okay? So the positives, okay? So you can make a mold and an impression of really anything. I could make any number of molds for any of these things. I just surround it in a thing, like silicone or plaster, let it set so it retains that shape. Then I cut it off into 2 halves, and then I can make copies of that same shape whenever I want. Okay? So you can do it with anything. Same thing is true for anything that was alive and it gets caught in the right conditions. Okay? All right. Good question. Any other questions? All right. Let's talk about the ways that life changes. Now, everything that's alive here on our planet has this, DNA. For things to change, your DNA has to change. We know things change all the time. We see it. Therefore, DNA must be able to change. The fossil record supports this as well. We have a whole billions of years long fossil record of things changing on our planet. Life changing, adapting. Well, what causes it to do that? If I increase the temperature in this room 20 degrees, what would you guys do? Do you take off your jacket? Good call. You're adapting, right? Same thing if I dropped the temperature. What if I opened the window and it got super windy? What if I turned off all the lights and it was super dark? Whatever happens in your environment, you will adapt to it. You will change something about yourself or the way that you respond to it to adapt to that new environmental parameter, right? Well, life does the same thing, as it turns out. Life in general, not just us, okay? Life will go through this thing called mutation. Mutation is when you experience any change to your DNA. What can cause that to happen? Radiation. Yes. Now, whoa. Hey, hold on. Radiation, what are we talking about here? Like if I douse myself with gamma radiation, am I going to become the Hulk? Can I Bruce Banner myself? No. Okay? That's not what I'm talking about. What is radiation? Someone refresh my memory. Are they waves?
Yes.
Okay, this is getting into aspect of physics that's not... Okay, particles is what I'm looking for here, okay? Particles and waves are different things. The only thing that seems to be both is light, okay? Photons behave as both a particle and a wave, which is really confusing physics-wise, but we're still working through that. Nevertheless, radiation, not a wave, particles. Particles that come from what? Decaying isotopes. Or fission and fusion, right? Fission being the ripping apart of particles, and fusion being the creation of particles, both of which happen in the sun. There's more fission and fusion in the sun, but, you know, be that as it may. It's happening in the sun, creating a ton of radiation that spreads through our galaxy and our universe. Most of that radiation is deflected off of our electromagnetic field or gets caught in our atmosphere, but a substantial amount of it hits you and every other living thing on this planet. When you absorb a lot of radiation, what happens? Bless you. What happens when you absorb a lot of radiation? Well, what happens first? What happens to your skin? Sunburn. That's what we call sunburn. Sunburn is essentially your body has been bombarded by enough radiation that, yes, the outer layers of skin, are dead. It has killed the cells there. How does it kill the cells? Radiation, these tiny little particles, electrons and protons and neutrons, scattering through our atmosphere, are hitting your DNA and knocking little pieces off of it, breaking a piece off here, changing a piece there in such a way that it cannot sustain that shape anymore, and it dies because enough DNA has died in your cell that it cannot sustain or replicate itself. So you get layers of dead skin that take on a darker color. Gives you that nice tan, right? What happens if you get too much of that? Any of you guys ever gotten sun poisoning? Oh yeah, I've got sun poisoning. I got sun poisoning on the back of my legs one time. Sun poisoning is when you get far, far, far too much sun. Your skin turns purple because the radiation effect has gone all the way through your skin. And now it's affecting the upper layer of muscles. It is not fun. The back of my legs were purple for about a week and a half, and I could not bend them without agony. It was not enjoyable. Okay. How did I get that, you may ask? Well, that's a very good question. I was lying on my stomach on a catamaran, going up and down waves. It was a storm. We were out on a net at the front of a catamaran. A catamaran is one of those boats that has the two pontoons that go in front. We'd strung a net between the two pontoons, and so the driver was over these waves, these storm waves, and I was holding onto the net going, the whole time for a few hours. It was a blast. But something I forgot was that, yes, sunlight goes through cloud cover. So it didn't feel hot, but I still got terrible, terrible sun poisoning on the back of my legs from being on my stomach under the radiation for that long. So fun during the time, but misery afterward. Okay, so that's the next level. That's when the sun has done so much damage, it's like tissue deep damage. And it takes a while for your body to be able to come back from that. Okay? A normal sunburn, ow, you slap it for the first 24 hours and it hurts, but then it's pretty much fine after that. Sun poisoning took me a week and a half. The next level, what were you just talking about? Right. Radiation sickness is where this comes in. Where the radiation has done so much damage, it has penetrated through your skin and started to affect things like organs and your brain and the way that your body, at a holistic level, throughout your whole body, knows how to function and repair itself. Radiation sickness is very common, not from sun exposure, but from exposure to more acute sources of radiation, like nuclear sources. People who have been exposed to nuclear reactors, or have been anywhere near when a nuclear reactor breaks down, when containment is lost. People who have been near nuclear weapon explosions. Do you remember when I told you when I went to the Nuclear Holocaust Museum in Nagasaki and Hiroshima? I went to both of them in Japan when I lived there. There are pictures on the wall there of people melting, walking out of the city with their skin melting off their bodies. I wasn't exaggerating. Those were real photos. What happened there? They received such a high dose of radiation from just being anywhere near that nuclear explosion that their body's cells could not maintain their integrity. They were ripped apart so much by that radiation, the cells were literally falling to pieces, which means that their skin was falling to pieces, shortly followed thereafter by their muscles. It melted people. So, that's an extreme form of radiation exposure. That's not the sort of radiation exposure I'm talking about, though. And yeah, you were right, by the way. Radiation exposure can cause cancer. Okay? What happens to do that? Your body's cells. Do you know what cancer is? No. No. Cancer cells are most definitely alive. Cancer. What cancer is when your body starts growing cells at an out of control rate. Yeah. It makes a buildup of cells in places where those aren't meant to be. Bladder cancer, your body sends messages, grow, 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 more, 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 because it's getting the mistaken impression that there needs to be more cells there. And so you start getting tumors there. Brain, heart, lungs, all of that. This is what cancer is. It's a buildup of cells in a place where there shouldn't be. Now, you can force your body to do things like that, like smoking. Smoking can cause lung cancer. Why? Because you are killing cells in your lungs and your body is continually sending the message to your lungs to repair it. So your body can get so used to doing that that it just doesn't shut off. And you end up getting lung cancer because your body is working overtime to produce cells there to fix the ones that you're killing by making the choice to smoke. Okay? That's what lung cancer is. But normal cancers, genetic cancers especially, those come around because there are mutations that shut off the impulse to stop growing. Your DNA says, hey, you need to start here and end here. So radiation knocks off that one command to stop growing. You get cancer in a place. Okay? So yeah, it can come around as the cause of radiation exposure. And it can become genetic. Okay? That impulse, that loss of command there can be something that you pass on because guess what? Your DNA gets passed on to your children's DNA, right? So yeah, that's where cancer comes into this. Now we can also use radiation to cure cancer. Radiation therapy. It doesn't cure it. It gets rid of the cancerous regions. Why? For the same reason why those people got melted in Japan. Okay? You bombard your tumor with a very acute, almost like a laser thin radiation beam, and you just kill all those cells. And you kill all the cancerous growths. That's what radiation therapy is. Okay? That's how it works to get rid of cancer. Okay. So now that we're clear on DNA and how radiation affects DNA, when this thing happens, when this turns into another thing because of radiation, or when this gets knocked away, or when something else gets added, we call that mutation. Mutations can be positive, negative, or irrelevant. I want you to think of mutations in those three categories. Positive mutation, negative mutation, irrelevant. A positive mutation is something that helps that thing survive. Okay?
Would it be like whenever people can't get HIV, like there's...
Right. Some mutations cause you to be automatically immune to things. Some mutations cause you to be more susceptible to things. There are people who are born or develop over time no immune system. And therefore, they are extremely prone to getting sick. Okay? So either one of those would be a positive or a negative mutation, right? And then there are mutations that just don't even matter. And honestly, those make the majority of mutations, I would say. Okay? So an example of a positive mutation, if a wolf is born with a mutation of my teeth are half an inch longer than my brothers and sisters in my litter. Okay? I got this mutation for bigger teeth. That would probably be a positive mutation for a wolf. Like bigger bite, yada yada. Okay? What about if that wolf is born without claws? Probably be a negative mutation. What about if that wolf was born with a brown spot on its fur? Irrelevant. Would not make a difference to the survivability of that animal. Right?
How did giraffes kind of be? Did they say that they mutated some long necks?
Their long necks were a mutation? Oh, absolutely. Okay, and this is an important concept. Every single change that has gone from us being bacteria billions of years ago to now has been because of mutations. This is how evolution works, my friends. The environment changes. Something changes. It gets colder, it gets hotter, it gets wetter, it gets drier. Something in our environment changes, and any living thing that doesn't adapt will die. Adaptation only comes because of random mutations. And this is true, my friends. Mutation is random. It's random. There's no point where a neutron says, I'm going to aim for that one so that this happens. Pew! All of a sudden, you've got blue eyes. Congratulations. That's not how it works. You are experiencing different mutations than I am, right? And so have all of our ancestors going back billions of years. All it takes, though, is for one positive mutation. What happens if one person or one individual in a population experiences that one positive mutation? It makes all the difference. Because mutations are passed through DNA when you reproduce. Let me give you an example. This is the rock pocket mouse. Everyone say hello. Hello, rock pocket mouse. Very cute. Okay. Don't let Diablo see it. Okay. He'll go for that screen, right? No. What do you notice about these two rock pocket mice? They're both the same species, rock pocket mouse, but what do you notice that's different about them? One is brown and one is black. Just so. What? Okay. It's okay when I'm talking about mice. All right? The rock pocket mice, these guys live out in, they're in Arizona. Okay? Now, the normal color for rock pocket mice is this tannish brown color. They live in the desert. Would you say that that is a good color to have in the desert? Why? What does it have to do with the sand?
The color of the dirt is the same color as them.
They blend in. It's camouflage. The more camouflage you are to your environment, the harder it is for a hawk or a coyote or a wild cat or anything else that's a predator to you, the harder it is for them to see you, pick you out, and go to eat you, right? So, why is there a black one then? Well, there is this place out there that is covered in miles and miles of basalt. Do you remember what color basalt rock is? Yeah, it's a black rock, rich in the ferromagnesium minerals, right? Well, when the rock pocket mice, thousands and thousands of years ago, reached that basalt flow and started going out to live on it, what do you suppose happened? Well, not initially. What would have happened, though? You get brown, tannish brown mice that live on black rock. Yeah, they don't blend in anymore, right? They don't blend in, so it's easier for them to get hunted, right? Okay. Mutations. Always happening. There is no point when there are more or less mutations for any reason. So mutations are always happening. Very possibly, in the past, there had already been a mutation for black-furred pocket mice. But guess what? They live out in the desert. Black-furred pocket mice in the desert don't live long. So that gene doesn't get passed on. Okay? But now that there's a population that live out on the basalt flow, yeah, you develop that mutation for darker fur. That one individual, he survives longer. Everything okay? Okay. What's up?
He's just scared of the snake.
Oh, it's on your computer. I wondered why you came over here. Do you want me to take him away? All right. If he's disrupting class, that's beside the point. I have him in here for a reason I'll talk about in a minute. So if it's a problem, I'll take him away. Okay. Okay. My bad. I didn't know that's why you were over there. Are you okay?
I just don't want him to get on my computer.
Okay. All right. If you legitimately want me to move him, I will. Okay. Okay. Anyways, so mutation causes darker fur in the population. Yeah, don't let him go under the table. Over here, buddy. Okay. Mutation causes this darker fur in the population that's living on the basalt flow. The mice that have the darker fur on the basalt plateau, guess what? They are more survivable because they blend in better. An individual that has a mutation which causes it to survive better. It will live longer and it will breed more. This rock pocket mouse, the first one that got the darker fur, lived longer and bred with more mice, more other mice, and passed its genes on to more individuals over more time than the typical rock pocket mice did living on that basalt flow. Which means that over time, that gene for darker fur got passed through more and more generations across the whole population. Give it 20, 30 generations, every single rock pocket mouse on that basalt plateau now has dark fur. That positive trait got passed on. And this is something that we call inherited traits.
So that's like the same way like our skin tone is, right? Because on the higher up, it's like you have lighter and then like closer.
Skin tone is a tricky one. Is having one skin tone over another really a positive trait?
Well, didn't they say like, because like in the near the equator where the sun hits more, like you need to have or like you produce more.
It gives us, yeah, there's more melanin in the skin, but even the darkest skin, like the person from Africa who has the darkest skin you've ever seen in your life, that doesn't give you a huge advantage. Okay, they still get sunburned. Yeah, they still get easily sunburned.
Is it as easy as somebody from?
No, it's not as bad. So yeah, that could be why. Probably is a substantial part of the reason why there's darker skin in those places of the world. That's more of that sort of question more has to do with archaeology and societal like studies than it does with me though. I try not to speculate why people have the darker skin or not.
Well, I get that. I was looking at it from like a scientific perspective.
Yes, that's absolutely scientifically, that's a reasonable interpretation for why that would be. More exposure to sun, darker skin, less sunburn, all of that, okay? But a better example I can show is Diablo. Look at his skin. Look at his scales. He doesn't have skin, he has scales. What do you notice? He has color and he has patterns. The color and patterns he has are the product of who his parents were, okay? We breed snakes specifically to make certain colors and patterns. I'm going to breed Diablo and Medusa probably next year sometime because together they have the potential to make really cool patterns and colors. They will pass the traits that they possess on to their offspring. Do you have your mom's eyes or your dad's eyes?
They have the same one.
They have the same eyes?
Same brown eye.
Okay, what about hair? Don't tell me your mom has the same hair as your dad.
Looks like the same color.
Okay, color's fine. Curly, straight?
I have my mom's.
You have your mom's.
Yeah.
Okay, that's an inherited trait. Now, that doesn't necessarily give you a survival advantage, but it is still a trait that you possess. The patterns in these snakes were absolutely for survivability, blending in with an environment. He doesn't blend into anything, but he is the product of about a dozen generations of artificial changes. Okay. Now I want to introduce a new concept to you. You just learned that mutations occur randomly as a product of radiation affecting DNA. Whenever a random mutation creates a positive advantage, that positive advantage gets spread through a population because that individual that experienced the mutation survives longer to pass that trait on. Are we all on board with this so far? Great. What about in a situation where nature doesn't have much to do with it? Elephants. Elephants. What's the big problem with elephants these days? What are the elephants facing?
They're being hunted for their horns.
Yeah, they're facing extinction because they are being hunted. They're being poached for their tusks. Poachers will shoot an elephant, cut off its tusks, and then leave the poor thing to die. I mean, there's something to be said for hunting for food. But when you just shoot an animal to cut off a piece of its body, you don't even do it the service of even finishing to kill it. Like, even if you just think of it like that, like you just don't even care enough. It's a terrible thing. I believe it's Kenya. The country of Kenya actually has a special military specifically for hunting down and fighting the poachers. They get in gunfights with poachers almost every day out there. And it's because dumb rich people around the world will still buy elephant ivory. But yeah, they are facing extinction because of that. Years ago, there was an elephant born with a mutation. That mutation wasn't bigger tusks. The mutation wasn't sharper tusks. The mutation was no tusks. Now, in a world without humans that hunt elephants for their tusks, does that elephant survive? Why do elephants have tusks? Self-defense, and they dig in the dirt, right? They fight with each other, they fight with other animals. It's a very intimidating display. An elephant without tusks in the natural world, without poaching humans, does not survive. But you know what? An elephant with no tusks doesn't get shot by poachers. So only because of this one situation where humans will do a thing, and that thing is such a threat, is this one mutation a positive mutation. Any other scenario, it's negative. So now we have an entire elephant sanctuary in Africa with an ever-increasing, growing herd of tuskless elephants because that positive mutation has been passed on from that one elephant to its offspring. The future of elephants may only exist because of a random mutation minus tusks. Okay? Interesting thought, huh? Diablo only exists in the way that he is with this pattern and with this color because someone made the choice to breed his mother with his father. And then the generation before that, and generation before that, going back for so long, I don't even know, right? He's an African species. They came over here from Africa at some point. They didn't look like this, though. I do now. We made choices for that. This is something called artificial selection, by the way, when humans make the choice for what is a positive trait or a negative trait. We'll talk more about artificial selection in a bit. All right. So, going back to our concept of the tree, okay, the phylogenetic tree. You start with a central root, that common ancestor, and it branches off from there as mutation does its thing, and different environments are inhabited by different forms of life, and therefore different traits will be positive or negative. That's why we have so many different off branches of life here, okay? Think of it as a nested hierarchy, okay? So you'll typically read a phylogenetic tree something like this, where here we have something that was alive, okay, and these are two different ways that you can read this. Here we have species A, okay? Species A existed for a certain amount of time, and then we see in the fossil record, species B rolls along. Species B exists for a certain amount of time, and then so here's species A, still continuing, right? Species C shows up in this one example down here. What happens to species A? You jumped straight from observation to interpretation. Observation first. What happened to species A? Yes, it's not there anymore. Where B and C continue, A is gone. Up here, B and A continue. No. C didn't happen in this scenario. A and B continue. C did happen in this scenario. A ends. Now give me an interpretation.
What I say, whatever I had said previously, I forgot what I said.
If I had, how many people in this room? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, including me. If we had to live in this room for the rest of our lives and we only got 10 meals delivered to us in this room, Eventually, 3 of us would die. Right? There's only so many resources available in a certain environment to hold a certain population. So, that being in mind, what is a likely scenario for what happened here? With B, A could compete. But with B and C, A could not. Be that enough resources, or maybe B and C were more efficient hunters, whatever the case may be, A could not survive, at least not as it was here. And so we see that species disappear from the fossil record, okay? So this is a way that you look at, excuse me, dude, I need to access this button here. Okay. Oh, he pushed a button. Okay, nope, stop pushing buttons. Stop. What do you do? Stop! Brother. Okay, so that's a phylogenetic tree. There's another way that we organize life called cladogenesis. Okay, we can make clades. A clade is a group of organisms that share a common trait. Most likely because that trait was derived from a common ancestor. Okay, so we organize those into groupings. Okay, similar to the same sort of concept I showed you with the groups and formations and such that we have with rocks. Okay. Okay, so A, B, C, and D all share the same trait. That's why they are all inside of this bigger circle of A. Help you out, buddy. There we go. Oh, no, I don't want you to go down there, actually. Man, you're just exploring everywhere today. All right. But B, C, D all share a trait that A does not. C and D all share a trait that B and A do not, okay? This is how you should look at clades. So, when we're looking at a cladogram, which will often be displayed as something like this in literature, you're going to look at where the most recent ancestor is, because that ancestor is going to be sharing that trait that you are interested in. So if I look at this is a phylogenetic tree. If I'm looking at this phylogenetic tree, I'm not going to be able to draw a circle around all of these and say, oh, that's a clade, because these two don't come from an ancestor within this group. These all come from that same ancestor right here. This one and that one do not. They come from this ancestor. They don't share a common ancestor until you come all the way down here. So I can't say that's a clade because they all don't share the same ancestor. But here I can because they all share the same ancestor right there. Okay? All right. I already explained phylogenetics, relationships between organisms, so on and so forth. Okay. This is another way that you can look at a cladogram. Okay? Being interested in most in a common trait. Okay, so here I have all of the horses. If I want to make a, if I want to separate all these horses, I can make a cladogram based on a few traits. For example, fewer than 4 toes on front foot, many teeth, shaped like molars. All the horses that fit into that category are right here. All the horses that don't fit in that category are shoved off over here, but still within the study of horses. Then I want to separate it even more into molars tall, cement on all teeth. Well, that's all of these horses. So all of these horses have that trait in common. All of these horses have this trait in common. And all of these horses have the same trait of being horses. Okay? That's how I would make a cladogram. If I want to make one, and I'll give you an example that's even more general than that, animals at all. Okay? Animals with jaws, that's going to be everything except the jawless fishes. Anything with lungs, that's going to be anything except your jawed fishes and jawless fishes. Anything with claws or nails, now we exclude our amphibians. Anything with mammary glands and fur, that's going to be just in mammals, so on and so forth. Okay, this is how cladograms work. Any questions yet?
We're gonna have to make
Huh?
we're gonna have to make one.
Make a cladogram? No. I've thought about making an exercise like that, but it would require a much more in-depth research into like forms of life, which I don't have enough time for in 8 weeks.
I think we did this environment.
Yeah, biology, this is something that they would emphasize on. Okay, so let's talk about some misconceptions that people have about evolution. Because evolution, even more in the past, but still today, is still highly contested as a hot topic, okay? I want to tell you some things here, okay? Evolution is often treated as the overall answer for life. Evolution does not in any way seek to explain how life began. Okay? It explains how life changes over time. It does not give any hypothesis on the beginning of life. Okay? Just bear that in mind. Nor does it just say life started simple and became complicated. A lot of people have that misconception. Okay, yeah, sure, life began with bacteria, but here we are with humans. We are the pinnacle, like we saw in the phylogenetic tree. We are the apex of evolution on this world, right? No. It's a very human biased perspective to think that. If it were true that evolution started simple and ended complex, or has progressed through complex, then we would not see the continuation of all the same simple forms of life that we had initially. If that were true, we would not have bacteria on Earth still. Evolution does not go from A to Z, increase in complexity over time. That may have occurred, but it's not because, and it's not a tenet of evolution that has occurred. Okay? All right. Then there's this concept that you need to laderize. That means I'm going to look at A as being older than B, as being older than C, as being older than D. That's not what that means. Okay? We do not read these things left to right. Look at them bottom to top. Okay? We may have an older fossil record or a more complete fossil record for A, but B probably lived at the same time. We just happen to know that B came from this ancestor down here that A did. Okay? Same with C. C and D both came from the same ancestor that B did right here. Okay? Think of it like that. This describes relationships, not necessarily chronological development. Okay? And then there's these, which show the same information, just a different way of showing it. Okay? A, B, C, and D all have the same root ancestor down here. B, C, and D all have the same root ancestor here, and C and D's root ancestor is right there. Also, bear in mind that the fossil record is not complete. We have found a lot of fossils. We by no means have found the fossils for everything that ever lived. And the number of fossils we find is dependent entirely upon the fossilization conditions. So if I find 1 fossil of species A and 40 fossils of species B, my inclination is to think, oh man, there must have been way more species B living here than species A. That's the natural conclusion. But I also have to remember that that may be wrong based upon the vagaries of fossilization, right? There may have been far more species A, but they didn't live in an environment that favored fossilization. So those are all things we have to bear in mind, okay? The number of fossils and the quality of fossils found does not necessarily equate to the quality or quantity of the life forms that live there, okay? All right, let's touch on taxonomy here for a minute. Taxonomy is, well, I've got it up here. It's how we look at the relationships between the groups of different organisms that live in our world. Okay, so here we have our tree again. I actually like this tree. It's a little less biased towards people, right? We have bacteria. This is the common ancestor here, where we have bacteria split off, archaea split off, and then everything that became everything else split off as well, okay? So bacteria, then we move into archaea and everything else. Then out of all this, we get all these little things like amoebas and molds. and then fungi and animals. Did you guys know that we are more closely related to fungi, like mushrooms, than fungi is to plants? Yeah. It's actually very interesting. There's a lot of interesting studies that... Really, dude? There's a lot of interesting studies that go into studying whether or not that's why people describe mushrooms as feeling like they're eating meat. And why it is disconcerting for a lot of people to eat mushrooms because it feels too much like eating like meat or something. But yeah, fungi and animals, much closer related to each other. And then we got things like plants and algae. And then we've got all of these other animals down here that make things like planktons. Okay? Okay. Animals, plants, these live in a weird space. They're somewhere between the two. They come from the same ancestor as animals and plants, same root ancestor as the rest of us. Okay. Prokaryotes. These are single-celled organisms. These have the longest fossil record. When cells developed, they stayed as single cells for quite a long while. Then later on came eukaryotes. Eukaryotes are everything else. Okay, so here you see bacteria and archaea. Those are prokaryotes. Single-celled organisms. Everything else that came later, eukaryotes. Staying on the subject of taxonomy, which includes the ways that we name things, let's talk about how we name things in science. Okay? We have, you've probably seen genus and species before, right? Do you know what genus and species humans are? We are Homo sapiens. Homo, that is our genus. Species, Homo sapiens. Okay? Sapiens being the species. Okay? So, when you look up an organism, like even if you just go to Wikipedia and you look, you're going to notice that it gives you the complete breakdown of the taxonomic classification that it's in. Okay? So we're going to talk about this because you guys will actually need to do some research into different organisms later on in the class for a lab. So it's good that you have this information, okay? So we start off with domain. Our domain is eukarya. What does that mean? Multicelled organism. Kingdom, Animalia. Yes, we are animals. Phylum, Chordata. Ooh, this is a callback to something we learned a while ago. Or we discussed. We haven't formally learned it yet, but I did tell you about it. Chordata. We have a spine. Chordates are a group of animals that have spines, okay? Class, Mammalia. Easy enough, right? Fur, mammary glands, etc. Order, primates. We are primates. Suborder, Anthropoidea. That means we walk up on two legs. Then there's a superfamily, then the family, Hominidae, that has to do with things like head size, brain size, things like that. Then we have a subfamily, and then genus Homo, species Sapiens. Okay, so this is our entire taxonomic classification for humans. Right there. This is how it's described. This is how we do this whole process. This is what you'll need to do in lab, I want to say it's lab 5 later in the term. Okay. You always, excuse me. You always capitalize the genus. You never capitalize the species. Okay? And you can italicize the species or the species and genus. Depends on what you want to do. But you always capitalize genus and you never capitalize species. That's just the way that it is. Yeah, this system was developed hundreds of years ago. And the reasons for why all the ways that it is what it is, I don't know. And I don't know how many other people would. There are ways that we do things in science, particularly in paleontology, that are wrapped in tradition and really need to change. But it would take so much work to do that at this point. I don't know if anyone ever will. Yeah, you would have to reinvent entire parts of the classification system to change things. I'll tell you about this more later in the term, but we actually have a word that describes dinosaurs, certain dinosaurs, that calls them lizard-hipped, and we now know that their hips almost look exactly like birds. And the dinosaurs that have hips that look like lizards are called bird-hip dinosaurs. It's opposite than it should be, but we've gone for hundreds of years using that classification system. No one wants to change it. It would be too much paperwork, essentially. So, all right, let's talk for a minute about prokaryotes. Prokaryotes are broken up into producers and consumers. Producers are the ones, they're mostly photosynthetic, but they can also be chemosynthetic, okay? But they essentially take their nutrition. Oh, no, don't fall off my neck now, buddy. They take their nutrition, they utilize the sunlight, and they produce energy that way. Okay, they add to their mass that way. Consumers usually eat the photosynthesizers, the producer cells, to get their own energy. Okay. We have had fossil records for prokaryotic bacteria and archaea going back about 3.5 billion years. The earliest ones were chemosynthetic bacteria living at the bottom of the ocean. Okay. We actually still have a lot of these today, and they have adapted to live in the most hostile environments you can think of. This is boiling water at Yellowstone. And that's all extremophile bacteria living in it. If you ever look up a picture of Rainbow Pool in Yellowstone, it's beautiful. Okay? Are you looking it up, Jasmine? Are you looking it up? I said, if you ever look up a thing and then you pull to your computer, like I thought it was like, oh, she's looking it up. But yeah, Rainbow Pool in Yellowstone, it's gorgeous because of all the bacteria living inside of it, and it is boiling water, like near boiling water. Okay, we have bacteria that live miles underground. We have bacteria that live in the freezing cold of Antarctica. There are even things that can survive in space. And they're not even bacteria. You guys ever heard of tardigrades? Tardigrades are microscopic life forms that when they are put into an environment that they cannot typically survive in, they will desiccate their bodies, basically turn into mummies, until the environment becomes such that they can survive there in their full natural forms. There are tardigrades on the moon because we accidentally took some there.
How true is it that there's viruses frozen up in Antarctica?
Oh, very true, yeah. Viruses have been around for hundreds of millions of years, if not billions of years.
Like smallpox and stuff like that?
Oh, does smallpox live in Antarctica? That I can't say. I have no idea.
Like the Black Plague, like viruses?
Black Plague, probably not. Yeah. I cannot say what mysteries are frozen in the ice of Antarctica. We have found, like, old viruses and bacteria there. Would they even affect us? I don't know. Viruses affect different living things. Do you know that there are viruses that affect only trees? Viruses have evolved to prey or to target different things. Trees get sick from viruses. Bats get sick from viruses. Humans get sick from viruses. Sometimes the bat virus starts affecting human people. Right, as we saw. Is it likely that a tree virus will ever affect human people? No. Can't jump from a tree to a human. At least not without lab help. But yeah, there's lots and lots of viruses out there. I don't know what we may or may not find in places like Antarctica, though. Okay. Moving on to eukaryotes. This is just a brief overview of some stuff, some things that will go on in more depth later on. Eukaryotes. Okay, so we've got algae, we've got planktons, foraminiferans, okay? And then everything that came later, including us, okay? But all of these things, microscopic animals and organisms that live in the ocean, this is what goes on to make things like limestones, layers of chert, okay? The different types of rocks that we learned about in 1403, a lot of them are made by the fossils left behind of these ancient living things, okay? Green algae eventually became plants. Algae is a photosynthetic bacterial colony, more or less, okay? And you go from that algae which is a whole bunch of cells that come together and make this sort of colony, okay? That's algae is basically just a colony of cells. You go from there to a couple of different groupings, okay? You have non-vascular plants, which means that they don't pump water through their bodies, okay? That includes mosses and liverworts and things like that. Then you have your vascular plants, which would go on to become things like ferns and early trees. And then today we've got gymnosperms and angiosperms, okay? But how did this begin? How do we go from that? Through something called endosymbiosis. Essentially what happened here was a consumer cell consumed a producer cell, but there was some sort of mutation which caused it not to actually digest it. Instead, what happened was the photosynthetic producer cell started giving some energy to the consumer cell, and the consumer cell benefited from that because it didn't actually need to go eat anymore. So the producer cell was sustaining both of them. And through this endosymbiotic process, symbiosis is when two organisms work together towards a common end, okay? Through this endosymbiotic process, we get to see more sophisticated, I think you're blocking the volume there, okay. More sophisticated cells show up, okay? And it is through all of those that we start to see the development of tissues in those plants. Those tissues each fulfill a certain function, just like the tissues in your body do, okay? You have muscle tissue, you have skin tissue, you have brain tissue. And each one of those fulfills a different function in your body, right? Same thing in a plant. Cellulose tissue, leaf tissue, okay? All of those do different things in a plant. But it all started from this team effort between that producer and that consumer cell. And that allowed them to come out of the water too. Because before this, they had to stay in the water because they didn't have any sort of rigid structure. It was the specialization of those cellulose tissues that allowed them to make rigid enough structures to come out and support themselves in the presence of gravity outside of having buoyancy from being in the water. All right, we talked about vascularization. Vascularization is just the ability to pump water through your system instead of needing to be in water to have it benefit your system. All right. Oh, it's stuck again. Let's give it a minute. There we go. Did I skip something? Yes, we did. Okay, so today we have two very large groups of plants called angiosperms and gymnosperms. Okay? Angiosperms are flowering plants, and they're actually still pretty new, evolutionarily speaking, in the world. We didn't actually have angiosperms on Earth until the dinosaurs were almost extinct. Okay? So there were no flowers before then, or at least not in the way we have them now. Gymnosperms have been around for a lot longer. Okay? Gymnosperms includes things like conifers, so Christmas trees, pine trees, things like that. They've been around for a lot longer than angiosperms, and they, both these groups, gymnosperms and angiosperms, have very different ways of reproducing. Gymnosperms will send their pollen through the air. It'll get picked up by pods, okay, on the receiving tree, and then they will grow seeds in pine cones. And those pine cones will fall to the ground, they'll dry out, they'll open, the seeds will fall out of the pine cone, and then you'll get your new generation of trees there. With an angiosperm, they make flowers. The pollen goes from some flowers and goes into other flowers and pollinates those flowers, and you'll get your growth of your fruit. That fruit grows seeds inside of it. The fruit falls down to the ground, and the fruit grow there. Okay? This is a process called double fertilization. It fertilizes the seeds, but it also fertilizes the fruit, the growth of the fruit around those seeds. Next time you eat an apple, you're essentially eating a plant egg. Think of it like that. Interesting, huh? Okay. All right, so some other eukaryotes, fungi. Let's see, where do we have it here? Oh, no, this is just animals. Doesn't actually have fungi on here. Okay. Like I mentioned before, fungi are much closer related to animals than they are to plants. So They spread via spore, which, if you're not familiar with that, a spore is essentially a very, it's kind of like a pollen. You can think of it as like that. It's a genetic package that's tied up in a very thin sort of wall, thin sort of membrane. But if it dries out, it dies very easily. So that's why you'll see mushrooms typically only in humid or wet environments. Okay. Then we have animals. Animals are spread into vertebrates and invertebrates. What does vertebrate mean?
They have their fishes, no?
Yeah, fish for the most part are vertebrates. Specifically what? Yes, you need a backbone. Yes, vertebrate means that you possess a backbone, okay? Invertebrates do not have a backbone. So you can see here, only these, which chordates, means the same thing, right? Only these have backbones. These are the vertebrates. Everything else here are invertebrates. Okay? So notice, by the way, where are mammals again? All the way up here at the top, because we made the chart. Okay, so everything else, mollusks. This includes things like snails and your clams and stuff like that, okay? Invertebrates, okay? So we've got things like sponges, sea sponges. You guys ever seen a sea sponge? Did you know that there was even an animal in the ocean called a sponge? Very, very long fossil record, okay? They are colonies of organisms that make more or less a community, a structure under the water, and they each occupy their own space in that structure, but they each perform their own function. Okay, so they'll pull water in and they'll send water out, and then there will be other animals that catch the food and they'll process the food and share the nutrition with the other members of the colony. It's very interesting. Cnidarians, this includes sea anemones and jellyfish and corals. They often share a 5-part symmetry, okay, a lateral symmetry, where if you ever look at like a sea star or at a jellyfish, you'll notice that you can separate their body into like 5 different sections evenly. Okay, that's what that means. Mollusks, this includes things like gastropods or snails, cephalopods, so squid, octopi, nautiloids, ammonoids, bivalves, which includes clams, oysters, scallops, etc., and then brachiopods, which are very similar to bivalves, but have different symmetry in the way that their shells separate from each other. Okay? So with bivalves, you can separate the 2 halves of the shell, and they will be symmetrical to each other. With a brachiopod, you have to split it, like you would have to take a saw blade and slice it down the middle, looking at it straight on for them to be symmetrical. The 2 halves of the shells are not symmetrical with each other. That's the easiest way to tell the difference. And we'll focus on all of that for a lab later on in the term. Okay, then we have bryozoans, which look very similar to corals, but have been around for a lot longer and aren't as big, and the actual animals that live inside of them are distinctly different from coral animals. Arthropods, okay? This includes the group that insects are in, okay? Insects are arthropods. The most famous arthropod throughout history is a trilobite. I have a bunch of them in the display case out front. These are trilobites, called so because their bodies are separated into 3 different sections, okay? The cephalon, thorax, and pygidium there. We'll talk more about those later on in the term. But trilobites are often used as index fossils because they have been around for an extremely long time. Unfortunately, they died out right before the dinosaurs came around in the Permian extinction. But they were around for a very long time, so they are fantastic index fossils. Crustaceans are also arthropods, crabs, lobsters, shrimp, etc. Insects, starting off with non-flying insects. Insects didn't actually develop wings for a long time. Insects are characterized by having 6 legs, 3 pairs of legs. Okay? Notice that that's different from spiders. Okay? Just bear that in mind. We'll talk about that more later on. Echinoderms are sea urchins, sea stars, which used to be called starfish, but I guess the scientific community is moving past that and calling them sea stars now. It's more correct, I guess, because they're not actually fish. Whatever. There are some extinct forms. Graptolites are one of these. They kind of looked very similar to sea anemones. They're extinct now, but also make for a great index fossil. This is a crinoid, by the way. You've heard me talk about crinoids before. These are also called sea lilies. I have a lot of crinoid fossils in the room here. They were stacks of circular calcite discs that make a stalk, and at the top of it is what we call a calyx. It looks like a flower. It's actually a whole bunch of little tentacles that would catch plankton out of the water and bring it in and eat it in the middle. Okay? And do this. Now, the cool thing about crinoids, they've been around for an extremely long time, but they used to just have to grow in one spot. They used to just grow somewhere and stay there like a flower. The crinoids that we have today, yes, they are still alive. This is an actual picture of a crinoid. They've actually evolved the ability to detach at the bottom here and then use their feeding arms at the top to propel themselves through the water, kind of like a jellyfish, and latch on somewhere else. It's an amazing evolutionary trait. They used to just be stuck there. All right, now our chordates, our vertebrate animals, okay? So, over time, we get this first initial spine, which we called a notochord, which evolved into a spinal column, which then developed a backbone to protect that spinal column, and muscles now attached to that backbone, and we have much more range of motion and all of that. Okay, so this includes fish, amphibians, reptiles, dinosaurs, birds, mammals. Okay, those are the main groups of vertebrates that we will be discussing in the class. Mammals, though, that's the one that's most relevant to us. There are 3 types of mammals, okay, which they are separated from each other based upon the ways that they grow their offspring. Okay, so there's placentals. Can you name a placental mammal? The babies don't grow in a pouch. Yes, that's us. We are placental mammals. The mother grows a placenta, which is an extra organ, inside of her body with the baby. And that organ is what processes the food and everything that the mother eats and everything. What goes into the placenta is processed and given to the child to grow that child. So the mother, I don't know, none of you have probably been present for any kind of birth. I've been present for the birth of all 3 of my children. You give birth to the child and then another organ, okay? It's a placenta, okay? And that's usually thrown away, disposed of in some way. My sister-in-law eats them. Yeah, it's supposed to be really healthy. Yeah, it's kind of gross, yeah. It's a little bit, yeah. It's almost like cannibalism, where you're like eating your own organ. Anyways, but yes. So that's a placental mammal. So most of the growth occurs in the womb, and then they give birth to a mostly formed infant. Okay? Then you have marsupials. Yeah, marsupials are pouched mammals. They give birth to tiny little babies. A kangaroo, Joey, is given birth, and it's like a little bit larger than a grain of rice. Super easy births, right? Makes placental females very jealous, right? Really easy births, but that baby then needs to finish growing in the mother's pouch. Wallabies, Tasmanian devils, wombats, koalas. Yeah, those are all marsupials. Which marsupials live in Australia, right? Australia has been separated enough from the rest of the continents of the world that marsupials pretty much died off everywhere else, and pretty much only marsupials were in Australia. Okay. And then the third group, monotremes. These are mammals that lay eggs. Huh? Yeah, the platypus. Okay, our friend Perry here, he is a monotreme. Also, echidnas. These are mammals that lay eggs. They are kind of evolutionary holdovers from our common ancestor with reptiles. Yeah. There are also reptiles that give birth to live young. Do you know that? The rosy boa constrictor will give birth to live young. It won't lay eggs. Interesting, huh? Those are all mutations, right? Or a lack of mutation if it didn't benefit that particular species in the environment they were living in. Okay? Any questions about anything we've talked about today? I know I went really long today. This sort of thing is fascinating to me, so I tend to linger on it a little bit longer than I probably should. So sorry I went for so long, but any questions? No? All right. I'm going to end the recording here.
Is it possible that